Well guys, just like that, the Battlefield 6 beta has come to an end. So after days of grinding this historic step forward for the franchise, there's a ton of stuff I want to discuss over the course of this 2,000-word review. But like I've stressed before, as much as I love making content, at the end of the day, I'm just a casual player with a 9-to-5 job like everyone else. I'm not a full-time Warzone streamer, I'm not a Battlefield creator who's been flown out to events, nor am I some random influencer who's never touched the franchise. Instead, I'm what I'd consider a pretty average fan of the Battlefield series with no strings attached. A decent player who's stuck it out through 2042 and definitely played a lot more Battlefield than some of the personalities DICE has promoting their latest title. So guys, if you like the sound of that and want to hear an honest opinion on everything Battlefield, drop a like, hit subscribe, and let's have a casuals review of the Battlefield 6 beta. Kicking things off before we get into the good, the bad, and the ugly, I gotta start by saying that Battlefield is certainly back. While the title definitely has some odds and ends it needs to clean up, the way that EA has managed to double down and actually revive this franchise while under so much public scrutiny has been nothing short of amazing. A while back, I was worried that 2042 may have done irreparable damage, and not just to the game itself, but public opinion as well. However, since that very first reveal, the Battlefield community has come back in droves, all the while stopping competitors like Call of Duty and Delta Force dead in their tracks. And while I do think EA's target of 100 million players is outrageous for any game, between the game's return to a gritty modern conflict, vastly updated multiplayer, and upcoming single-player campaign alongside a battle royale, I think Battlefield 6 may just be the franchise's best ever opportunity to truly go mainstream. And again, while you and I may have our issues, the fact is that Battlefield 6 has already outperformed Call of Duty's peak concurrent player count while just in beta. Yep, a franchise that had just a few thousand players online a month ago is now sitting pretty with a beta that has already seen over 500,000 players online at once via Steam alone. Battlefield 6 has almost certainly already hit well over 1 million concurrent players across platforms, and we haven't even started. So in my eyes, while Battlefield has certainly changed over the past few years, it honestly had to, and after a few botched attempts, it looks like EA and the Battlefield devs finally found their footing, mostly because they've actually started listening to the fans. Most game modes feel much better balanced, maps have a lot more detail, and the core gameplay loop is simply better and more complex. But while my overall impressions are that of a game that may honestly recapture the heights of the franchise's golden era, like I mentioned, the beta's been a mixed bag at times. So with that being said, let's hit the good, the bad, and the ugly of what might be the biggest Battlefield game ever made. Kicking things off, Battlefield 6 is simply stunning to be a part of. While Battlefield 5 and 2042 tried desperately to jump on the punchy, colorful Fortnite art direction, Battlefield 6 feels much more akin to something like Modern Warfare 2019, as the game looks to recapture the more down-to-earth, gray and somber tone of modern conflict. War is messy, dusty, and not as slick and sexy as DICE's prior games would lead you to believe. Tie that into a series of much more grounded real-world locations like the war-torn streets of Cairo and a New York City that's on the brink of collapse, and players get the most stunning and terrifying depiction of modern conflict we've seen since the fall of Shanghai in Battlefield 4. The game is stunning through and through with more detail, more dynamic physics, and a crispier sound engine if your system can handle it. But even outside of environmental immersion, weapons feel clicky, ragdolls fall in believable ways, and new mechanics like body dragging help create a more tangible, in-game world.
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, Jake. Oh, we're doing it, Jake. Jake!
But even better than that is the fact that Battlefield 6 isn't just a pretty face. While the game looks incredible, it also introduces new mechanics across the entire game, helping flesh out the player experience in both big and small ways. Things like body dragging, crouch running, and micro-destruction add to a more intimate relation between players and their game, while deeper weapon customization, the rebalancing of classes, and denser map designs really bring the whole Battlefield formula forward. It feels like the first Battlefield game in a long time where the devs have actually sat back and bolstered the game by building on top of the original foundation. Mechanics like the respawn menu POV camera, vehicle respawn timers, and sniper sweet spots have all made a return from prior games instead of the devs trying to come up with something new. In a lot of ways, the devs have adopted a mentality of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that's made the game feel a lot like a combination of Battlefield's greatest hits, while also building upon those systems with a much longer development time. And a lot of those new additions come in the form of revamped gunplay, where the weapons feel much more alive, and a new mindset behind map development where environments are much more dense, detailed, and immersive, again reminding me of Modern Warfare 2019, but with much better, slicker gunplay. In fact, while the gunplay has issues we'll talk about later, the overall feel is great. Weapons feel unique. The new points-based gunsmith makes them feel more personal, with kills feeling a lot more impactful than they have in the past.
Oh my god, I'm cooking.
Overall, there's a ton of good in Battlefield 6 so far. The foundational mechanics, gameplay depth, and immersion are all very close to perfect, but like I've alluded to, there are certainly some issues. Kicking off the bad, and we gotta talk about this menu system. I feel like ever since the 2042 beta, the devs have totally lost their way when it comes to menu design. Currently, the menus take up way too much real estate, don't feel very well organized, and are brutally hard to navigate on controller, with the cursor often disappearing or punching in and out of a selection because it's impossible to understand if you need to tap to back out or just move to the side. The one thing that redeems the current menu design is the ability to tab over to your lobby and see your entire squad standing by, prepped for deployment. But aside from being able to see your squad mates, the reality is that the community has already offered up better solutions over the past week than what Battlefield Studios has built over the past few years. However, while the menu system doesn't really affect gameplay, one thing that does is this game's horrible visibility. In an effort to create a more immersive game world, it feels like Battlefield 6 may have overcooked some of the visual effects like volumetric dust and the contrast between both sky and shadows, leading to some visually deafening spaces.
Absolutely fucking invisible. There's no chance you will ever see that.
If you're playing on higher graphics or locked in on console, there's so many effects that ultimately you'll be at a huge disadvantage, and the reality is that most players that care about their KD will have to play this game on low graphics. And not just for visibility's sake, but also performance, as this game can make really good systems chug under pressure. But finally, the last bad note I have about Battlefield 6 before we get into the ugly is what a shame Rush has become. Rush has been a staple mode for years, and while it was terrible in 2042, everything was terrible back then. So with Battlefield 6 being such a stellar game everywhere else, it's pretty shocking to see just how poorly the mode has been implemented. And while the devs are currently trying some adjustments to spawn timers and MCOM countdowns, I think it really comes down to how restrictive the maps are and how badly the defenders can spawn camp their opponents, often being able to shoot directly into what should be a protected spawn area. In my opinion, the mode is just way too claustrophobic and doesn't allow the attackers to have as much freedom as they need to solve a tough objective. But whether you agree with my specific criticism or not, one thing's for sure, while most of the other modes are pretty well implemented, Rush is currently a disaster. However, outside of the horrible menu system, some shaky PC performance, visibility issues, and Rush's continued fall from grace, the game doesn't have a lot of bad things in it from my perspective, yet I do believe there's one or two things I definitely feel are ugly. Now, like I said, there's not a lot wrong with this game, but there are two pretty glaring issues I can't let off the hook. First off, we gotta talk about Liberation Peak. While Liberation Peak isn't the absolute worst map in Battlefield history, it's pretty fucking bad. And the fact they highlighted this map in their record-breaking beta means that they had some level of pride in its gameplay, but across the board, especially on Breakthrough, it's trash. Too cluttered for tanks, a sniper's wet dream for infantry, and just sorta meh across the board. And while one bad map isn't a death sentence for the game, my concern goes back to it being showcased as one of the best things the game has to offer. So my worry is that Liberation Peak is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a ton more even worse maps to follow. Ultimately, we'll have to wait and see, but it's something that's already making me nervous. Now, the last and most important discussion around this game has to be the game's time to kill and gunplay. While a lot of hardcore Battlefield fans feel that the game leans too far into the omni-movement trend seen in Call of Duty, I personally feel the movement and tactics don't all currently align, which is something I called out in depth with my initial impressions as well as my review of the support class here. I think Battlefield has been facing a bit of an identity crisis, so the devs have just jammed the game with every sort of mechanic in order to see what sticks. And while I definitely believe these mechanics will eventually get ironed out, one thing that needs to be solved immediately is the game's horrific hit reg and time to death. Overall, the TTK is just too fast, but even more concerningly, it's too inconsistent, with some fights taking several more hits than expected, while also dying in a single frame in another. As someone who's certainly not an expert, I'd offer a guess that the game is distributing information inconsistently in its packets. Sometimes a packet misses all the hit information, while the next gets several packets of information to send at the same time, creating a super inconsistent feel in a game that already has a time to kill that's a tad too fast. Now, while I'd like to critique things like bullet spread and the effectiveness of assault rifles at range, in the game's current state, it simply feels too broken to objectively review. So at the end of the day, while the game looks amazing, has a great feel, and is shaping up to be much more complete than prior titles, the foundations of the gunplay are quite far from being ready. In my eyes, the story of the Battlefield 6 beta is that of an incredibly impressive leap forward from the franchise, with a dev team that's still unable to hide the skeletons in their closet. Battlefield's netcode has been a problem since Battlefield 4, and still to this day, no matter how great the rest of the game is, it seems like Frostbite has more technical debt than any dev team will ever be able to handle during development. So while I have massive hope for this title, and even higher expectations given the budget, Battlefield Studios has less than 2 months to get their shit together, or they risk another Battlefield 4. This next title has the potential to be the greatest game in franchise history. With deeper gameplay, more detailed maps, and more content than ever, it appears like EA finally has a winning formula, but as we stand here roughly 50 days out, it's on the devs to execute in a bigger way than ever before. But guys, tell me what you think and drop those comments below, and for everything else Battlefield, stay tuned and subscribe, and as always, thank you guys for watching.